travel light. Travel light, be likable. And then, the third thing, which kind of helped me with starting Kayak is, so I just sat down with a piece of paper and said, God, what if we just did search really well? We didn't sell anything. I had to fire 25% of my staff, which is over 400 people, and I could only afford to give them 2 weeks severance. So you can imagine, through no fault of their own, they lost their jobs and their financial security, just like that. So my role as CEO is, how is Kayak going to fit into an agentic AI world? And the honest answer is we don't know yet. We went public for 1.4 billion, and we sold for 2.1 billion. And then after selling, the stock tripled.
First of all, this is my voice. I'm Tim Green, and I have ALS. This podcast is not about ALS or living with disabilities. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I don't feel sorry for me. I am a father of 5 with a marriage that's lasted for over 33 years. I am a #1 New York Times best-selling author of 41 books, an NFL first-round pick with an 8-year career. I worked on TV for Fox Sports, Good Morning America, Court TV, and Extra. I've hosted BattleBots, A Current Affair, and Find My Family. And I am also a practicing attorney. In this podcast, we're diving into real-life stories. From triumphs to trials, we'll explore the extraordinary in the ordinary. Join me, Tim Green, and my son Troy each week for real conversations, laughter, and insights. Because life is a journey, and everyone's got a story. My voice in today's episode is powered by 11 Labs. Stephen Hafner, you've got to be everyone's favorite entrepreneur. You figured out how to get people the least expensive price on all aspects of travel by simply comparing all the other websites that are out there so your customers get the very best price. With a mobile app and website offered in 30 countries and in 18 different languages. Of course, we're talking about Kayak, which you recently sold for well over $1 billion, and you stayed on to keep running the company. I understand that today you're going to tell our listeners how they too can turn their own good ideas into billion-dollar companies, sell them, and ride off into the sunset. Because it's just that easy, right? Steve, thanks for doing this, and welcome to our podcast.
It's great to be on, Tim and Troy. I've watched a bunch of your episodes. Good stuff. I'm honored to be part of the number of folks who you invite on. I was actually just watching Troy Aikman. He did a great job.
Let's begin your story back before you were even born. Your father is an American and your mom is Swedish. Not how people say they're Swedish now, but she is actually from Sweden. How did those two meet?
Yeah, it's an interesting backstory. My dad's from Arkansas, and he had gone to Spain to study in college and ran into my mom, who was Swedish and was doing the same thing in Spain. And look, they hit it off. They ended up getting engaged shortly thereafter. And he brought her across to Dartmouth, where he was going to college. And I arrived a couple of years later. And, it's funny how the world works. I don't think a guy from Arkansas would ever marry someone from Sweden, much less, a prize like my mom. But he pulled that caper off. And I actually wasn't born in America. They moved to Peru when he graduated. So I was born in Peru. So I had to be naturalized as an American, actually.
How long was he over there for school in Spain?
He was over there for 3 months. So
how do you convince somebody?
Life in 3 months, which is
how do you convince somebody in 3 months to move across the world?
I guess he liked her a lot.
And what did they do professionally?
So he had majored in Spanish, actually. So right after graduation, he took a job with a company called Arthur Andersen, which isn't around anymore for accounting issues with Enron, if you remember that story. But he went down to Peru, was an accountant for a beer company, a brewery down there in Rimac, which is a little small town outside of Lima, Peru. And then he actually left there and started working for the brewery directly. We spent a couple of years in Peru, 3 years in Guatemala, a couple more years in Costa Rica. So we bounced around a fair bit when I was growing up.
Is any of that, traveling constantly as a family, does any of that inspire Kayak later or no?
Absolutely. I mean, look, I learned a lot from that. Number one is the importance of being likable, because we moved so frequently that we went to a lot of different schools, and you had to be likable to create a new friendship group, or or bad things happen to you. The second thing is not to be too concerned with things, because we were always packing up and moving. So the less stuff you had, the better off you were for an easier transition. So travel light, be likable. And then, the third thing, which kind of helped me with starting kayak, is don't be afraid of new things. Don't be afraid of change. Don't be afraid of taking risks. And there's lots of different ways to skin a cat. So, a lot of Americans don't travel. I mean, I could say that's true for many countries, but particularly in America. So they don't know that the same problem can be solved multiple ways, right? We think the American way is the best way, and often it's not. So when you bounce around to lots of different cultures, you get it broadens your perspective, makes you a better global citizen, and it actually gives you a lot of humility that, what you think is the right way may not necessarily be the right way, because the problem you're probably confronting has been solved by lots of other people and lots of other different cultures, sometimes better than you might think you could solve it yourself. So it's a great way to grow up.
It's great that you were able to turn that lifestyle into a positive. Did you share your parents with any siblings, or were you an only child?
I did. I've got an older brother who broke the seal 14 months before I was born. So, he was actually born while my dad was in college. So he was born in Hanover, New Hampshire. And then I've got a little sister who's actually just turned 37. So she's quite a bit younger than I am.
Where was she born? Are all three of different countries?
So she was actually born in Houston, Texas.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you consider Texas a different country than New Hampshire, a lot of people do.
It basically is.
It basically is. It used to be its own country, right? And it's actually got the right to subdivide into 5 states, which is not a well-known fact. But, if Texas wanted to have 10 senators, they could do that.
I didn't know that.
Most people find it so hard to move around when they're young. It seems like you genuinely enjoyed it, but was there any part of it that was hard for you?
I don't think so, because we were just used to doing it. It's like, being military kids, you just get in a habit of moving, and you don't know any different. And that's followed me through to this day. I move locations all the time, and I travel 3 or 4 days a week. So after this interview, I'm going to jump on a plane and go to Europe for 5 different cities in 3 days. No problem. Do it every week. But I could see how if you were used to being in one town all your life, and your parents said, "Hey, it's junior year or senior year in high school, we're moving," that would be like a game changer, or a lot of brain damage. But if you're used to moving every couple of years, you make your friends, you get to learn a new country or a new city, and you're like, okay, I'm over it. I kind of understand what this program is. Let's go try something new.
Have you had a favorite place you've been of all the places? I guess maybe at first as a kid, did you have a favorite place? And then how about as an adult?
Yeah, I guess I didn't really have favorite places. I had favorite people, is the way I think about it. So there's just a type of person that I love being around, and that's someone who's traveled a lot like me, who's lived in many, many cities, who's vibrant, who gives you new ideas, adds energy to you when you're talking to them.
Yeah.
I love people like that. And, when in the course of I've been here for, 55 years. In the course of 55 years, I've probably met maybe 40 of them, honestly. And I keep in touch with each and every one of them. So I still talk to, a couple of folks from Costa Rica, one from Guatemala, folks I picked up along the way. And, I might go 4 or 5 years without seeing them, but when I'm with them, it takes you right back to where you were. It's just awesome.
What were your interests in high school? Did you play sports or anything like that?
Yeah, my interests are primarily girls and friends and football. I was nowhere near the players you guys both were, right? I actually was a guard, 205-pound guard. I went to high school in Austin, Texas, what's called a 5A school. So it was 4,000 kids. Real-time football. I was I'd say a below-average player on a below-average team. The whole 3 years I was on varsity, we won 3 games. But so I clearly wasn't doing it to be the champions that you guys turned out to be, right? And I never even thought about winning championships. I thought, hey, let's get through this game and then let's get to the after party. That was more like what all it's all about. Win or lose, we still had a great time. But yeah, so I did football in the fall, and then I did track in the off season, just because the coaches wanted us to run around a track and not get too fat. But I would not consider myself an athlete by any stretch of the imagination.
Guard in Texas is no joke.
The one thing that was great about Texas high school football, I don't know if it's still the case, but back then you could clip within 3 yards of the line in scrimmage. So I was a guard. I was 205 pounds. That's still small back in Texas. So every play I would pull and take out the legs of a guy who was like 260. And that's it. That's what I did for 4 quarters, for 3 years in a row. And we still lost, almost every game.
Texas football is a different beast. You must have been one heck of a student, though, to get into Dartmouth. What was your favorite subject? And what attracted you to Northwestern to get your MBA?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I did reasonably well at school. I was a public school with 4,000 kids. And yeah, I knew I didn't want to stay in Texas. So I wanted to get a good education. I was fortunate to be reasonably smart, reasonably hard worker. And I had a brother who was much smarter than I was and still is, and a much harder worker. And he had gone to Dartmouth. And my dad had gone to Dartmouth too. So I applied to 2 schools coming out of high school, University of Texas, because it was right next door, and that was my safety school. And the tuition at that time was only $2,500 a year. And then Dartmouth, where I was going to have to get a scholarship. But I'd only been to Dartmouth twice, but I had had good times with my brother both times. And I applied, I threw a flyer in, and was fortunate enough to get admitted. And then when I got there, I got really crappy grades the first 2 terms. I was there because, finally I was in a student body that everyone was uniformly smart, and everyone was uniformly better educated than I was, because they had gone to prep schools and, private schools, et cetera. They hadn't gone to a big Texas public school where the teachers did their best, but, they had 45 kids in the class. Now I was in a school that had 14 kids in the class, and all of them were smarter than me, and all of them were better prepared. So I really had to up my game in terms of workload. That's the one thing I knew I could do, is I could outwork them, outstudy them. And, as a result, I quickly realized it's hard to outwork somebody in English or film studies or, traditional liberal arts, because everybody seems to get A's in those. So I went after economics, and a little bit of science, and then I tacked on for fun history, because history was always something I was really interested in. So, I didn't have a 4.0 GPA, but I had a really high GPA for being in those, sciences, non-liberal arts kind of classes. And that served me really well coming out of Dartmouth. When I was going through recruiters would say, hey, you only have a 3.45 GPA. Everybody else that we're interviewing has a 3.8, 3.9, or 4.0. Why should we take you? I was like, well, that's because I took hard classes. I worked my ass off. I was way more than just classes. I did rugby and extracurriculars. So my job at Dartmouth wasn't to maximize GPA. My job at Dartmouth was to maximize the amount I learned and the connections I made. And I'm proud of the GPA I got, because I worked really hard for it. And guess what? I got the jobs. So I had a great college experience, but those first 2 terms were really, really rough.
And then did you decide to get your MBA after? At what point, did you decide to get your MBA?
Yeah, so I graduated. I had a little bit of debt, so I took a high-paying job. At that, back then it was either you took investment banking or you went into consulting. I went into consulting, paid off my debts, and then after 3 years, I said, okay, well, what's next? And again, back then, the career track was kind of you went and got your MBA. So I applied to Stanford, Harvard, Dartmouth, and Northwestern, got into 2 of those 4, and picked Northwestern because I'd never been to Chicago. That was it. I mean, it's a really well-ranked school, but I just wanted to get out of Hanover. I knew what that's all about, cold and remote. So I went to Chicago. I got married right before I went to business school. Spent a couple of years there. Went back into consulting because that was a well-paying job, and they actually paid for my tuition, Boston Consulting Group, and then started off my professional career. Never thinking for a minute that it would end up with me being a tech entrepreneur. I was just going year by year. Let's learn something new. Let's work with cool companies, cool people, cool projects, and make a little money and get out of debt.
What was your first job out of college, and how did you end up at Orbitz?
Yeah, so after college, so my brother took an investment banking job with Morgan Stanley, and I saw how he was working. So I would go visit him in New York City. He worked like a dog. They all did. I'm talking 100-hour weeks. After a year of working there, I barely recognized him because he dropped so much weight, and he had to wear a suit every day, et cetera. So I knew I didn't want to do investment banking. So I said, well, consulting pays the same, looks like it's a little easier. So I joined a small company in Westport, Connecticut called Marketing Corporation of America, which was founded by a bunch of ex-Dartmouth students, or Dartmouth alumni is, I guess, the better way to call them. So 3 of my fraternity brothers and I all signed up to be analysts in their program. And we all lived together in one little flop house, and I did that for 4 years, learned a lot. Worked on a lot of great cases, and that was the start of my career as a consultant. I did know one thing though, is I didn't ever want to wear suits. I could go to work in shorts there. The only time we wore suits is when we went and visited clients, which was as little as possible. And after 4 years, I was like, okay, I got the consulting record down. Let's do something else, and that's when I did the business school route.
And then after business school, did you go right to Orbitz when you got out, or you just went back to
No, I joined another consulting company called Boston Consulting Group, which is a pretty well-known shop. And I was hired in the Chicago office, but then I transferred to Stockholm for a bit. And Orbitz, I kind of got, I don't know how many of your listeners are actually even familiar with Orbitz anymore. Back when the internet was first starting to happen, we started a company called Orbitz, which the whole idea was to bring the booking of airline tickets online, and they were a client of BCG, and as they put the company together, the CEO at the time that we helped recruit said to me, "Hey Steve, aren't you tired of writing slides? Why don't you come work at Orbitz and do the real thing?" And at the time, I had three roommates, one of whom left to go start Amazon with Jeff Bezos. Guy named Jeff Blackburn, really smart guy. Another guy went to Sequoia Capital to help fund all these new startups, and another one went to Yahoo early days. By the way, I'm the only one who's still working. So clearly, I chose the wrong thing, which is going into the online travel business. But yeah, so I did Orbitz. Worked there for 4 years. Started up when we got to 1,600 people. We went public. And I quit 2 weeks after that and started the next company, which was Kayak. And that's been a pretty fun ride. I've been at Kayak ever since.
When you left Orbitz to form Kayak, what ideas did you take with you, and what were you determined to change?
Sure. God, I could give you a long answer, but I'm going to spare your listeners that. So, Orbitz was a pretty simple business model. It was all the stuff that you used to do offline with travel agents, you can now do online 24 hours a day, meaning you could go to Orbitz, type in a request for a flight or a hotel. We'd show you stuff that was available, and then you'd buy it on Orbitz. 24 hours a day. Hey, that's great. The problem with Orbitz was we were still structured like an online travel agent. So we still had ticket printers. We still had customer service agents. We still had to take payment and remit payment to the airlines, hotels. There was just a lot of back office work. So we weren't actually that profitable. And, as I was thinking about it in the 4 years I was there, I was like, God, there's got to be a better way, because at Orbitz, we couldn't show you airlines like JetBlue or Southwest because we couldn't sell them. They didn't want us to sell them. And then a lot of people wanted to use Orbitz as a search engine to find something, but then they would go to American Airlines to buy it, or to Marriott to buy it. So we would bear the cost of the search, if you will, on our platform, but we wouldn't make any money because the booking didn't happen on us. So I just sat down with a piece of paper and said, God, what if we just did search really well? We didn't sell anything. We just searched the airline sites directly, the hotel sites directly. We also searched all the big travel agencies like Orbitz and Expedia and Priceline and others, Travelocity, if you remember that one. And then when someone wanted to buy, we just handed them off to whatever website they wanted to buy from. And what was beautiful about that is it was a better user experience. Consumers got what they want. They got a full picture of what was available to buy. They got to buy from whomever they wanted to, whether that's airline direct or through Orbitz, et cetera. And then for my economics, I didn't have to deal with payment or collecting personal information or dealing with customer service and changes or printing tickets or any of that BS. So all we asked for was a small referral fee, and then we put some advertising around the perimeter. And
did you negotiate the referral fee structure before you left? So you knew it was okay.
We did. So, when we launched the product, we said, first thing we're going to do, and lots of tech companies do this, which is we're going to focus on having the best product possible. So we didn't even ask for money, referral fees. We just said to American Airlines, for example, hey, let us search your website, and then we're selling you free traffic. And what we bet on was that we would build an audience. People would discover us, tell each other, their friends about it. And over time, we would get big enough that we could go back to American and say, hey, do you mind paying us a really small fee? You're paying Orbitz $2. You're paying Expedia $6 a ticket. How about you pay us 15 cents? And usually people would say, oh, yeah, well, that makes sense. I'll pay you 15 cents. And then the next year we'd ask for 20 cents. And the next year, and so on and so forth. So,
were you worried that Orbitz or Expedia or a competitor that was already kind of bigger player in the game, that they could just alter their business model to try and snuff you guys out?
No, because they were making so much money on the people, or so much revenue, I should say, on the people going directly to them, that to hand that person off to an airline or to one of their competitors would have required a big change in their thinking. So, sometimes a lot of times it's easier to start a company when you have nothing to lose. When you have a big company, it's the innovator's dilemma. I think a lot of business school profs call it. When you have a big company, it's hard to switch gears to the new, latest, greatest new thing, right? Mm-hmm. You've got an established P&L, established way of doing business. You can see the threat coming, but it's really hard to change the habit that you're already in, the groove that you got.
When you first started it, you obviously thought it was going to be successful, which is why you did. But did you think it could reach the point it has today?
I didn't. We had two sets of books, actually. We had the sets of books that we used to go raise money, and we raised a lot, over a couple $100 million. And then we had the books of what we thought, which were a lot more conservative and which never showed us making a profit. So look, I was glad to be debt free at that point in my life because I didn't know what was going to happen to Kayak, but I also knew that I could always get a consulting job. Mm-hmm. Right. So I had that in my back pocket. I knew I wasn't going to be destitute. But as it turned out, we launched the company in 2004. It's been 20 years, believe it or not. And by the second year, we were profitable. And then the question was, well, how big can this thing get? And it turned out it could get pretty big.
And when you said you were going to leave, did anyone at Orbitz try to stop you or convince you to stay, or try and talk? That'll never work. You should just stay here, kind of a thing.
Yeah. So look, I had helped recruit our CEO, Jeff Katz, at the time at Orbitz. He was a great, great guy. He didn't think I had a prayer of making any ground, but I didn't. I had a non-compete, but I didn't have a non-solicit, which meant that I couldn't go start something that competed with Orbitz, but I could take their best people to go do something else. So he and I sat down over drinks, and I just said, "Hey, let me compete with Orbitz. I don't have a chance. I've got no money. I've got no brand awareness. I barely have a team. But I promise you, if you let me compete against you, I won't take any of your people for a year. So I'll waive we traded the non-compete for the non-solicit." Mm-hmm. And what happened after a year is I took all the best people.
Did they think you were crazy when you called them, or at that point you had enough runway to kind of prove the concept?
Um, a little bit of both, but at that point in time, people had been doing Orbitz for like 5 years, and they kind of saw that okay, they wanted to go do something different, and I also had private equity stock, private stock, and this is when the internet was really, really starting to take off, and they had already cashed their checks on Orbitz when it went public, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they were looking for the next pop, and Kayak had a good chance of delivering on that, and we did.
What gave you the confidence to leave Orbitz and strike out on your own? We might have a listener who is thinking about it, but isn't sure if they should make the jump.
Yeah, it's a good question. I look at that point in time, my drag coefficient was pretty low. Drag coefficient basically means if you're married, give yourself a 1. If you've got a mortgage, give yourself another point. So now you got 2 points. You have a car that you haven't paid off. That's 3 points. Give yourself a point for every kid, especially if they're going for private school, and give them a point and a half. Once you have a drag coefficient above 4, it's really hard to be an entrepreneur because so many people are depending on you. Not just your family, but also your bank where you have a mortgage, anyone else you're supporting, etc. So I knew if I didn't start Kayak when I did, I was highly unlikely to do so. At that point in time, I had a drag coefficient of 4. I had twin girls, I had a wife, and I had a mortgage. So I was like, if I don't go start now, it's never probably going to happen for me. So I thought I'd strike out and do it.
Did your wife support it, or just think you were nuts?
She was supportive, but she had a much more realistic assessment of our likelihood of success, which was a lot lower than obviously than where I put the number.
She was using the other set of books, not the.
That's right. She was using the real set of books. So look, I was fortunate that we had a good business plan. We had a really solid team. We raised money intelligently, not just the amount of money we raised, but from who we got it. We got it from Mike Morris at Sequoia Capital, Joel Cutler at John Callis, Excel, like the who's who. And then we got lucky. And that's, for all these tech companies that are out there, everyone pretty much has the same idea, but it's about the team you build, the money you raise, and then getting lucky. Because
what was the luck for Kayak when you say you got lucky? What was the luck?
We started the company at the right time. If we had started a year or two earlier, I'm not so sure we would have cracked it. A year or two later, somebody else would have. So we weren't the first ones with the idea, hey, let's go search other websites, put it all in one place, and then let consumers go out and buy what they want. I mean, there's been kayaks of everything. There's been kayaks of dating sites, of commerce sites. For some odd reason, we just kind of worked for us. But I'm immensely humble about our chances. And how, even though we got the team, we got the right advisors, we got the right business relationships, and the right amount of capital, it all still boils down to luck. You just got to be lucky to be successful.
Was there a point in your journey in that first, you said at year 2 you were profitable. Was there a point in the first 24 months where you said, like, holy crap, this thing's really going to work?
The first time I really thought it was going to work was when I was going through customs immigration in London, and the guy asked me, "Hey, was I there for business or pleasure?" And I said, "Business." And he said, whom do you work for? I said, "Kayak." He goes, "Kayak, I know Kayak." And this was before we had done any brand marketing or any of that stuff, and we had just launched in the UK 4 months earlier. In fact, I was going there to rent our second office. First one was above this like adult theater, so I knew as we grew we had to go to a better office environment, and that's when I knew, like, without any marketing, without any prompting, the guy just started beaming, smiling, that our product was that good that he loved it. So that's when I knew we had a shot.
It sounds like outliers, right, Troy?
Oh, yeah. We just had Malcolm Gladwell on the podcast. And, in his book, Outliers, how it talks about how, it's never just the hard work. It's 10,000 hours and all that, but it's also the influences you had, using you without knowing you that well. You traveled a lot as a kid, so maybe that pushed you towards it. You're in consulting and you end up at Orbitz, and you have somebody who's, it's like, it's such a layer of things. I was saying for my dad, it's like he's in this, podunk upstate New York town, and one of the best ever Division I college coaches, just for some reason ends up coaching that high school. But when he's young, and then he's my dad's coach, and then that guy goes to college. My dad goes to college. He ends up going. That coach goes to the NFL. Like, just so many things stack up for it to work. So yeah, Outliers is a good. I love that book too. That's a good.
That is a book. That's a good book. And Malcolm's written, I think, 3 great books. I mean, he's written a ton of books, but 3 that resonate with me. But yeah, it's funny. Just for all of us, just to be on this planet makes us outliers. By the way,
Yeah.
if you think about the sequence of who had to get to meet whom, and have kids and etc. Just to be here, we're outliers.
Yeah.
But you're right. Everything kind of, I don't want to say happens for a reason, but I'm a big believer that you kind of create your own luck too, if you work hard and take risks and move around a bit. So we definitely try to create our own luck, but the vast majority of your experience is crafted by forces far greater than you are.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I think it's a golf quote. I can't remember who said it. It's funny. The harder I work, the luckier I get.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. It's perfect.
It seems like you have led a blessed life. Have you ever had a crisis in your life that shook you to your core? Obviously, I've been shaken to my foundation, but by the grace of God, I have been given hope. My question for you is, without judgment, do you have a relationship with your faith that you feel like you could lean into if needed?
I think everyone on this planet has had really difficult things happen to them, and you wonder, how do I deal with it? How do I get through it? Why me? All that kind of stuff. And I've had that on both the personal side, with family issues I don't want to go into, but and also on the professional side, which is a little easier for me to talk about. I've been in the travel business through both 9/11 and COVID, and both times professionally, it almost killed our businesses. And businesses come and go. That's fine, but people rely on our businesses to feed their families. So, with both 9/11, 2 days after that, I had to fire 25% of my staff, which is over 400 people, and I could only afford to give them 2 weeks severance. So you can imagine, through no fault of their own, they lost their jobs and their financial security just like that. And there was nothing I could do. I couldn't afford to pay them anymore, or the other 1,600 people would lose their jobs too. And then, the same thing happened with COVID. I mean, the travel business that Kayak was in, we basically went to zero revenue for the better part of 2.5 years. We were, better funded than Orbitz, so we could survive that because we had put cash away for rainy days, if you will. So we didn't have to part ways with too many of our people, and the folks that we did unfortunately let go, we gave them between 4 and 6 months severance. But it's tough to have to make business decisions like that when it's going to be gut wrenching for a lot of the people who are on the receiving end of bad news. So that both of those situations, I hope never to repeat. But I'm also smart enough to know that it probably will happen again and won't be foreseeable. And on your question of faith, I was raised Catholic. My mom is Swedish Lutheran, so I grew up going to Catholic churches, et cetera. And it's a very strong influence for me, and that definitely helped. Not so much because of one religion's edicts versus like my mom's Swedish Lutheran part, but just because it's nice to go into a beautiful church that's welcoming, that's quiet, where you can just, for me, it was about thinking things through, and also knowing that if I wanted to talk to somebody there, if I wanted to talk to a priest or a parishioner and get advice, that I could do that in a way that was totally different than talking to family and friends. You know, so that that's helped me through stuff. I mean, I've lost a couple of kids, so that's kind of what I'm referencing.
God, sorry to hear that. Going the exact opposite end of the spectrum, when you had your highest of highs moments, like I have to imagine, I don't know, but I have to imagine, taking Kayak public and getting some equity out of that. What was that feeling like? I mean, from starting it and negotiating a non-compete for a non-solicit to 2 years to profitability to, you take the company public, and obviously I'm not trying to count your money, but obviously, knock it out of the park. What was that feeling like when you woke up that next day?
Yes, it's funny. I've never done anything for money after I paid off debts. um, the biggest feeling for me, the best feeling was our IPO day, which happened in 2013 or 2012, actually, a long time ago. And knowing that our employees were crying because we had taken this financial burden off their back, it was about seeing the impact of going public on our team and for our investors and folks who had, put their time and capital into us, giving them a payback was just immensely fulfilling for me. I don't care about my own balance sheet. And then the second day was when we sold the company to Booking Holdings, which happened only a year later. Um, we went public for 1.4 billion, and we sold for 2.1 billion. And then after selling, the stock tripled. So for all of our employees who stuck around, which most of them did, it was just it was a life changing event for a lot of them, and that I found just immensely, I was just humbled by.
Did you hold any stock on the sale?
Yeah, so in the sale, we got paid 2/3 stock, 1/3 cash, and that honestly was probably the best decision I've ever made, and on behalf of our shareholders.
Yeah, that triples. That doesn't suck.
Yeah, it's gone up since then too. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean the company that bought us is just a truly amazing company. So again, you think you're building a great business. There's always a much better business with really smart people, and we got bought by one of those companies. I'm just tremendously grateful for that, and that I'm still sticking around.
It sounds like a great fit. Hey, as a father of 5 daughters, how do you balance your responsibilities as a CEO with your personal life?
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier these days than it ever used to be for two reasons. Number one, the tools that we have. We have smartphones now, so you can do work at a soccer game. You can do work any time of day, and we're a global business, so that's very helpful. So the productivity tools have gotten so much better. And the second is, the flexibility that we have at my company. You can, we're one of these hybrid workforces. You can work from anywhere you want to globally, and you can come in the office as often as you like to, or as little as you like to. So you put those two pieces together with a third one, and the third one's probably the most important, which is we have a really strong team. So I can trust the folks on my team to take care of stuff when I've got another obligation to my family, and they can trust me to help them with their obligations when they have their own commitment. So, if you have a strong team and a strong culture, supplemented by great tech tools, you can do work-life balance very successfully these days. When I started Orbitz, you had to be in the office 5 days a week, 12 hours a day. You had to get on airplanes to go visit airlines and business partners because you had to do it face to face. Zoom, what we're doing right now, how hard would it have been to have this conversation prior to video conferencing? It would have been almost impossible, right? I would have had to come to you guys, right? Well, I guess we're in Boca, so it's not that far away from Miami, but it would have been a big commitment. So you can get so much more done productively these days with the tools that we have than you could, when I helped start Orbitz, and I had twin daughters who were infants, and I did, apologies to my ex-wife, I did a terrible job of balancing work life, but now I'm much better at it. I have a much stronger team. We have better tools. We have a strong culture. It's a lot easier these days, and I'm very grateful for that. And we impress upon all of our new employees the importance of letting folks know where you are and letting people know that you need to check out for a bit, and they'll cover for you.
When you're working, I mean, obviously it sounds like one of your guys' core tenets of the company, but you hear a lot of stuff in the news now about people kind of making people come back into the office 4 or 5 days a week. It sounds like you guys are going the opposite way.
Yeah, look, we're a tech company, so we have really awesome offices with like massage rooms and lunch and food, and it's ping pong tables and pool tables and all that noise. But that's great for our young folks who want to come in and socialize and get work done and brainstorm. If you're my age or in your 40s or 30s and you got young families, you've got other commitments. We're not going to mandate that you come into the office 5 days a week. I don't think we're ever going to go back to that. Even if we had the power, if you will, to tell our employees to do that. You know, our employees work at soccer games on Saturdays. If they on Tuesdays need to take their kid to the doctor, take your kids to the doctor. If you want to go on a 4-day trip, tacking on 3 days to a business trip, you're performing on kayak, do so. You know, there's nothing I like better than having our employees go see the world partially on our dime. They come back as better employees.
Your team must love that balance. What's your vision for Kayak in the next 5 to 10 years? How do you plan to maintain the company's competitive edge?
That's the question of every CEO, center of plate of every CEO's job is how does my company stay relevant, stay dynamic? How do we create shareholder value and capitalize on the newest, greatest trends? I've seen a couple of big shifts at Kayak, right? The first one was taking offline travel online. It took a while for consumers to figure out they didn't need to wait and call travel agents or go to airline ticket offices. They could go online and book for themselves. The next one was the shift to mobile devices and apps and MWeb, that they could do it on a small screen versus a big screen. And then the newest one that we're navigating right now is agentic AI. The idea that, you can talk to ChatGPT or to Google Gemini or Siri and Alexa and tell the agent to do something that you used to go to Kayak to do, right? And I don't know how that's going to play out. Right now, I'm part of a company called OpenTable as well, and we're a launch partner for ChatGPT, and it works pretty well to say, hey, book me a table at Carbone in Miami for 2 tomorrow night. It's around 7:30, and the agent comes back and says, hey, I found a table at 8. Is that good enough? Yeah, book it. Airline tickets slightly more complicated, right? Because you've got maybe 4 passengers. There's 2,000 different flight options. You need to balance, time of departure, time of return, the fare. Do you want to pick your seats? Do you want to check bags, et cetera, et cetera? It's harder and harder for that to be done by voice. It'll get there at some point, but it's going to take some time. They have to do payment and all this other stuff. So my role as CEO is, how is Kayak going to fit into an agentic AI world? And the honest answer is we don't know yet. We've got our best teams working on this. We're an early adopter of all these new technologies. So we're working with, I think 7 different AI engines, because who knows who's going to win. I think, our biggest job is make sure the technology is available where the consumer is expressing their travel interest. But it's going to be fun. The reason I'm still around is because we haven't figured it out yet. Travel search is still broken. Agentic AI, I hope works, and I hope Kayak has a strong role to play there. But 5 to 10 years in the tech world is an awfully long time to think ahead.
Yeah, that's true. Are you worried about a competitor who's more integrated with AI, or do you think you guys can stay ahead of that by working with all the agencies?
Well, look, the fundamental thing consumers I know to be true is they need to cross shop. Agentic AI is great if you know what you want to do, at the time you want to do it, with finite amount of people, payments all set up, etc. But if you don't know, you just want to go to Europe for 2 weeks this summer, I'm not so sure you want to spend a lot of time talking to Gemini. You may want to visit a couple of travel websites yourself, or via an app, talk to some friends, get an idea of, gosh, do I want to go in July or August? What 5 destinations should I consider? What are the prices? What hotels should I stay at? For how long? What should I do? I think agentic AI is going to help with some of that, but it's still going to be a heavy lift of you visiting lots of websites and consulting other people and getting ideas, et cetera. So I think the cross shopping behavior, it's going to be really hard to do just with voice.
I think people too, there's like almost like a trust factor with any kind of, if it's AI or just shopping online, like you always want to test the prices. There's
Oh, for
like,
sure.
think about now if people are in a store, like you see a lot, they're like taking pictures of things, like looking it up on how much does this cost on Amazon? Can I get it cheaper in Amazon or in the store? That kind of thing. That same mentality, I think if whatever, any AI agent, any one of them said to me, yeah, a flight to Miami is going to cost this, I'd be like, yeah, I got to check that. I don't know if, I don't know what's factoring into that.
Yeah, it's a very considered purchase. And what the AI agents can't do is they're not very adept yet at finding deals and discounts and hidden prices behind paywalls or closed user group rates is the industry parlance. So it's going to take time. And consumer habit is a big moat. Regulatory scrutiny is a big moat, and then competitive dynamics. I mean, if an agent came to Kayak right now, we know they're there because we can detect them. That actually violates our terms of use. And theoretically, we could block them. We're choosing not to do that right now. We could charge them. We're choosing not to do that right now. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But for sure, my job is to make sure Kayak's relevant, and we're taking a hard look at this. It's fun.
With all the places you've been, I'm curious how many languages you speak.
I speak English poorly, and then I speak Swedish and Spanish. My mom speaks 7 languages, by the way, so she's way more impressive than I am.
Did she teach it to you? Is that where you got it from?
No, I spent a couple years in Sweden, and then obviously the Spanish that was my first language, but it's not as good as it should be.
Despite all of your success, I know that your greatest accomplishment is your family. Please tell us about your girls and your wife, and feel free to boast.
Yeah, look, Kayak someday will be a rearview mirror and may be out of business, but your legacy lives on in your family and friends. I'm very, very cognizant of that, and I've been blessed to have 5 girls, ranging in age from 24 all the way down to 6, and it's just been incredibly fulfilling to watch them grow up, particularly since with that age range they grow up in different times, right? And I get an appreciation for that, and I've also been blessed to have a great wife in Stacy, who keeps me honest in just about everything we do, and is the primary caretaker for our girls. The younger girls, the older ones are, they're almost off the payroll, but they're 2 of them are out of college and one's still in college, and I can see a path where they're off the payroll, but I'm looking forward to them starting their own families in the next 5 years or so too. So when the smoke clears on kids, I will have been a dad. Well, I'll have had a minor in my house for over 40 years, and it's been just so fun, so fun.
My daughter turns 6, like in a couple months, or not even a couple months. So I'm gonna have to get with you outside the podcast and get some advice I'm terrified of the ages, not 6, but whatever, 12 to 20, whatever it is. I'm terrified.
Yeah, it's all about stamping out social media. That would be the only advice I'd give you is if you can put social media at bay, keep that at bay, you'll be doing a great duty to your daughters.
Now on to our final word segment, where we ask our guests a few rapid fire questions. What was the happiest moment in your life?
Happiest moment of my life was the birth of my twin daughters.
What is the biggest adversity you've faced?
The loss of one of my daughters.
What are you most excited about?
I love the pace of technology, and I love the whole premise of AI and agentic AI. I just need to find a role for our company in that emerging world.
If you could go back, what advice would you give your younger self?
Be more humble. There was a point in my life where I thought I was really sharp and I needed to be the loudest view in the room, and I was always right about everything I decided. And looking back on that, I realize now that the smartest person in the room, the most effective person in the room, is oftentimes the person who listens the most.
Do you have any book recommendations for us or for the listeners?
It's funny. I'm a history guy, so I like to read biographies. But my favorite book is called Confederacy of Dunces. It's a comedic book written by an author who only wrote one book, and John Kenny O'Toole. It's based on a cast of characters out of New Orleans. And it's a hoot to read. So if you're only going to read one book this year, Confederacy of Dunces.
The name of our podcast is Nothing Left Unsaid. Do you have anything you want to say?
I just want to tell you guys, I've enjoyed watching a lot of your episodes. This one I don't think holds up to a lot of ones I've seen, but it's been a tremendous pleasure meeting both of you. Tim, Troy, it's been an honor.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining. And Steve, I ask at the end of every episode, I ask our guests, who are a couple of people you know personally that you think we should try to get on the podcast?
People I know personally. Business? Do you want business people? You want celebrities? What are you looking for?
Anything. The more the merrier. Anything you got.
Okay. Have you reached out to a guy named Brad Gerstner?
I don't think so.
Put that name down, Brad Gerstner. He's got another big podcast with Bill Gurley. Take a look at his cast. He is an amazingly dynamic guy. He hates doing other podcasts, but I bet if I asked him, he would do it. He's a lot more interesting than I am.
Oh, I do know who this is. I recognize him. I've seen their podcast with Bill Gurley, so I do know.
Yeah. No, he's awesome. And he's going to be in Miami next week, actually.
Steve Hafner, it has been such a pleasure to get to know you. Thank you for being on our podcast, and congratulations on all of your success. We will have to do another episode in the future about Open Table.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Tim. You're an inspiration.
Thanks, Steve. Really appreciate it. Great meeting you and hearing a little bit about your story.
Thanks, Troy.
Today's episode is brought to you by the ALS Investment Fund, a specialized biotech venture capital investment firm focused on neurodegenerative diseases, particularly ALS. They manage a large and diversified worldwide portfolio of ALS-related companies, collaborating with a global network of scientists, clinicians, foundations, and patient advocates to accelerate therapeutic development, investing for a world without ALS. Discover more about their mission and impact at alsinvestmentfund.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, consider supporting the podcast for free by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform, leaving a review, and sharing it with your friends. Your support means the world to us. This episode of Nothing Left Unsaid is brought to you by 11 Labs. Their groundbreaking technology makes a huge difference, and we're grateful for their support. To learn more, visit 11labs.io. A substantial portion of our sponsorship proceeds go to tackleals.com, funding cutting-edge ALS research. If you'd like to join the fight and contribute, visit tackleals.com. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on Nothing Left Unsaid.